the experience of moving around the world, which I've been doing for the last several years, has made me an optimist all of a sudden. I was quite perturbed, as any thinking, feeling person would be these days, because of how much shadow there is moving through the world right now. I prefer the word shadow to the word dark for a very simple reason. You can have dark and then it doesn't imply it's the opposite of light. But if you have shadow, light is required, you see, to make a shadow. And all that a shadow is the blocking of the light. Because the light is the eternal reality, and no amount of shadow can ever destroy that light, but it can block it so that we don't see it. And at this particular time in the world, there is a great deal of shadow, and that shadow is making an attempt to block the light in obvious ways by causing a great deal of suffering and confusion and separation. But it's also trying to block the perception of light from those of us who know that the light is there. And so our singular purpose, the singular purpose of all incarnations of all souls, is to realize the light. And we can call that self-realization, we can call that God realization, however you want to call it. But it is to understand the expansive, unchanging, eternal nature of the light. So nowadays, I'm so happy to be in an ashram with pictures of the masters and these wonderful statues of the deities, and in your other temple just so much that is so divinely inspired that I'm with my cousins, my brothers and sisters, and we all know what we're doing. We all know what we're doing here. We are in the first battle of Kurukshetra is on the field of our own consciousness, in which the shadow and the light are always playing. And it's not that we necessarily lose faith, but we do from time to time lose contact. And so I've thought about it a lot, that we have the feeling that the grace of the divine, that the grace of the master, that the presence of the guru it comes and goes. You know, sometimes we feel inspired, sometimes we don't. I remember once in my life, everything was going really, really badly. And I sort of whispered to one of my friends, this is a terrible period for me. And then pretty soon it won't be. And then everything got really positive, and I said to my friend, this is a really wonderful period for me, and pretty soon it won't be. Because that's how it happens. It's not a straight line. We have this idea that once we put our feet on the spiritual path, once we decide that I really want to live for the light, that it's just a straight line. We're here and everybody's going like a sprint, like a 200-meter race, and we just go straight down this line, and some are ahead or some are behind. But when one actually really begins to live this more than just theoretical, it's more like, I think it's the flight of a bumblebee is actually what it is. It's like we go this way and we go that way and we go this way and we go that way. And it's not simple. The karma is not simple. We just have to gradually sort of untie all of these knots that we don't even know are in there. And some years, I dare say at this point some decades, but that just make people very nervous, are better than others. Some quarter centuries are better than others. But think of it, we've been doing this a long time. I remember a satsang that Swami Kriyananda gave. I Swami Kriyananda was 41 when I was 22, and I knew him for some 45 years. He left this planet 10 years ago. I always felt like a child when I was with him, always. I was at one point when he was writing his own autobiography, The Path, which is his experiences with Yogananda. It was the last book he wrote before he got a computer that you could type on, a word processor we called it then. I don't know if that word still exists even, but it was the last book he wrote before a computer came in, so he needed a manuscript typist, and that was me. So I got to type and retype and type and retype because he was a very conscientious author. And at the end there, let me think of the whole story. Oh, we were in Hawaii, another woman and I, and he finishing the final editing. We needed to leave town, so there'd be no distractions. And we had just been working so hard, our minds were melting. So we decided to go on a boat trip, and so I was going to make an arrangement for us to go on a boat trip. The woman with whom I'm making reservations says, "How many adults, how many children?" I was 30 at that time, so was my friend. And I really almost said 1 adult, 2 children. But I was sure when we showed up, she would not appreciate our half-price tickets. So I crossed my fingers. I said 3 adults because I felt like I wasn't telling the truth. After 45 years, I decided I was about 11. I was just old enough to stay without a babysitter. That was my position when Swami passed away and left. He was 86. No one lives forever. He had to go. But I recall him talking to me at the end of very close to the end of his life. And he met Yogananda when he was 22 in 1948. I'm going to talk about this book eventually, Autobiography of Yogi. Many of you have seen this book with an orange cover. The orange cover is a 12th edition. Many changes have been made by those who publish it. This is the 1946 edition, the first edition, just as Yogananda wrote it. Actually, it includes an addendum that is from the second edition, which 2 editions were done in Yogananda's lifetime. But in any case, Swami Kriyananda read this in 1948. He was living in New York City, and he took the next bus across country to Los Angeles. Yogananda was still living at that time, 1948, and Swami G was a very, very highly educated, extremely intellectually gifted person. He grew up in Europe. He ended up speaking 8 languages. He was a very strong man. He was also a truth seeker at the age of 22 and had great faith in his own understanding and his own power. In 1948, words like guru and karma and even yoga were not known. Swami thought that yoga was some kind of yogurt, honestly, because it wasn't. It's only been 50 plus years, 70 now, but the whole world has turned around. If we ever think we're not making an impact, we are making a big impact. He flew across the country. Yogananda was there. He managed to meet him when he arrived. And the first words he said to Master, as I call him, to Yogananda, was, "I want to be your disciple." And Swamiji said never in his life had he ever imagined he would say those words to another human being. But the great good karma of the moment for him was that he recognized greatness, he recognized spiritual wisdom when it was put in front of him. But interestingly, Swamiji had a very interesting phrase, because he now, then the master accepted him, initiated him as a disciple on the spot, and took him into the ashram as a monk, and initiated him as a monk and as a disciple in the first hour that they met. And Swamiji found himself living in this ashram with this Indian guru. He said it was such a radical change in his life that he said sometimes he would literally feel like he was going to faint, and he would have to sort of sit down and just gather himself together. And the ashram at that time was a little chaotic. and like some ashrams can be, you may have had a little experience with that. We have a retreat in California, where I'm from, and I'm going to go back now. And I worked in that retreat. My first job when I came was the kitchen. As soon as I came here, I went and looked around the kitchen. It was being in the kitchen is great. I saw the sign from, I think, Vishnudevanandaji or from Shivanandaji about the importance of the kitchen. Anyway, so I stand by that. But in any case, I remember when this group of people came, about 5 or 6 of them, and they told us they were from Venus. They were all from Venus. They were from another planet. They'd come to be with us, yeah. And there was one man who didn't speak, and we said, "And who are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm the token human." So ashram life is colorful, let's just put it that way. People feel that our consciousness is more fluid than the consciousness of many people. So people who have very fluid consciousness often come in and think that we're the same. We're not always the same. The people from Venus were very nice. They were just from Venus. What can I say? Now let's see, where was I? I've totally lost the thread. Let me see if I can find it again. Oh yes, Swami G wanting to be a disciple. Oh yes, now I remember, wanting to be a disciple. And he said, because he had such absolute faith, which does not come in one lifetime. In fact, when I was there with Swami G working on his autobiography in Hawaii, and we were working on the chapter where he reads Autobiography of a Yogi and just leaves everything behind. He was very close with his parents, but interesting, his parents had just gone to Egypt. His father worked for an oil company, and he had literally put his mother on the boat to join his father in Egypt when he found Autobiography of a Yogi. This, of course, is a time without cell phones or email, so everyone who could influence him was gone, and then the book comes into his hands. Aren't God's ways marvelous? I have a question for you, which I will ask you in the next several sessions. Why do we ever worry about anything? It's a question. It's almost my mantra now. Why do I ever worry about anything? God has the whole thing planned. So Swami's there with Master now, and his parents are on the other side of the world when it really was hard to get around the world. And he settles in, but he said, I accepted everything my guru said to me unhesitatingly, but never unquestioningly. You see the difference? Isn't that beautiful? And what I'm wanting to talk about is just, how do we really live the spiritual life? What are the essential elements? And I brought the autobiography because I wanted to read the first sentence. In the world that I live in, where I know this is on your bibliography for teacher training, someone told me. And in the world that I live in, of course, people have read this many, many times. And so we even have a parlor game called Trivia from Autobiography of a Yogi. What was the name of, Master's third sister or something like that you don't even know. But the first sentence of this book is very interesting. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. Very first sentence. Millions of copies of this book have been sold. 50 languages. First sentence. And then he says, in my own life, path led me to a God-realized master. Now, one of the things we play in the trivia game, because many people know that first line, everybody calls it the guru-disciple relationship. But it's actually the disciple-guru relationship, which is a very, very interesting point. Because until you have the receptivity to be a disciple, you won't have a guru. And you don't need a guru yet to become a disciple. It's a question, and these are the threads that I've been starting, and I'll finish weaving here. The spiritual, to be successful on the path that is represented in this ashram, and many of you are dedicated to it, and some of you are here exploring whether or not this is your path or whether the path belongs to you. This is, and I commend all of you who are responsible for making this place happen. It's a glorious opportunity you are giving to people to be able to dive into a life like this and really test the waters and find out. And the art of this is twofold, which is self-realization with a capital S, means the divine self, but the little self also has to get engaged and get engaged properly. And since my theme for these days is life lessons from Autobiography of Yogi, I think starting with the first sentence of the book is a really good idea. Because to become a disciple, it's very interesting. First, you have to be integrated enough in your own self and strong enough in your own self, especially if you're living in the West, as we are, although West and East are becoming awfully mixed up, especially in Silicon Valley where I live, where more people, not quite yet, but you can go into lots of places there and think you're in Calcutta or you're in Bangalore. It's just the same. I went to Starbucks in Delhi with my friend, who is the honorary pujari. She's American, but she's the honorary pujari for Starbucks. They asked her to do the puja when they opened Starbucks. I mean, we're really this is the new age right here. And so she takes me over there because she has endless credit cards, complimentary cards. So I go into Starbucks in Delhi and I see, what do I see? I see a lot of young Indian men and women sitting there on Apple computers. I said, across the street from our temple, there's a Starbucks and it's filled with a lot of Indian men and women with Apple computers open on their counter. It's all just this one world now. But those of us who chose to put on white bodies this time and grow up in whatever families we grow up in, white or not Indian bodies, whatever they are, we have to have a certain amount of imagination. Just a certain possibility to just see the world a little differently than everyone around us sees it. My problem growing up was I could never figure out what the heck they were doing. I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why they were so interested in what they were interested in. The only thing that interested me was theater, because I guess then I didn't have to be anybody. I could just pick up a story and be in that story, and I didn't have to figure out who they were. Fortunately, God rescued me very young. But we have to have enough gumption inside ourselves to be able to think this life is for another reason. When I was young, because I was smart in school, this was just a particular thing, that some of us know how to do. I could never sing very well, but I was very school smart. So when you're school smart, in the culture that we have now in most countries, you're expected, you can do anything. So they all wanted me to do something. And I couldn't think of any of them. I literally had this picture in my mind of being on my deathbed, and I had been a very successful attorney, and now I'm dying, and it didn't seem worth it. I could have been a college professor, a doctor, a businessman. I just didn't know. I just stood there like this. And I had lovely people around me. I was very well brought up. But nobody was asking the question that I thought had to be asked, which is, where does happiness come from? And why do we suffer? And what can we do about it? Doesn't that seem like a no-brainer? But I couldn't find anybody who was actually asking that question. I was admitted at Stanford University. Now you didn't have to be quite as outstanding then. You could just kind of be a more or less normal person, and I was. And I was admitted to Stanford. I actually attended for 1 year, but I really lasted for 2 weeks because there was an enormous amount of knowledge and there was no wisdom. And that was when I began to think, these people are highly intelligent, but they don't know where happiness comes from, and they don't know what causes suffering. And therefore, I don't think they have anything to teach me, which was, you might have said, and it would be valid, that was a little teeny bit arrogant on my part, but it was the right kind of arrogance. So what we need to be strong enough in ourselves that we really are willing to have a little bit of adventurous spirit here and not feel that we just have to be like everybody else. And then when we have that strength within ourselves, we have to have the awareness to realize just because I know this much doesn't really mean I know anything. You know, that you just come to the edge of it, which is I have all these understandings, but I still don't know. And then we have to have the humility to recognize wisdom when it comes into the room, wherever it comes in, or when it comes from the library, or over these days, over the internet, all the different ways it comes. Everybody has their story about the moment when they realize, very simply, I need help. And I need help from a totally different kind of source. One of the wonderful lines in Autobiography of Yogi, wonderful in the sense that it opens up a whole universe of understanding. He says, thoughts are not individually rooted. They are universal streams of consciousness that we merely attune to and receive. And this is the meaning behind a statement in the New Testament where St. John, speaking of Christ, says, to all who received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. Now, when you translate that from a yogic perspective, you know exactly what it means. You know, the traditional concept of Christianity, Jesus, my Lord Jesus Christ is my Savior. And it's true. You know, for he's the guru. It's the irony is that it's often Christians who are against our guru-oriented religions, and Christianity is the most guru-oriented religion in the world. It's really quite ironic, but thank God he's a true master, so therefore he really can save you. But receive is the key, and this is what I was saying a few moments ago. Because our experience comes and goes, we think that God's love or the Guru's grace is conditional, that it comes and goes. But that's not true. What comes and goes is a very simple word, our attunement with it. You know, as I said, I'm not particularly a gifted singer. There's many musicians in our community, and all of us at least sing a little bit. And I've sometimes sing in our choir. And when I sing in our choir, I always make sure that a very good singer is right here. Because if I can hear her voice and her notes, then I can make mine match it. And I'm sure this time I've really got it. And then I go back home and I sing to myself, and I have a acute enough ear to know that I don't have it. I've lost it. Right, like that. And when you sing at all, and of course you do this wonderful chanting multiple times a day, and you are literally attuning yourself to the vibration of the ray of grace that amplifies, that enlivens this ashram. And it's your practice, and it happens on so many levels that you may not even be aware of. But you know, everything in the universe is energy. This is what Einstein told us. That's about how much I know about it. This is not a material universe. This is, of course, what the Indian scriptures have known all along. This is just a vibration of light, a vibration of Om. But for some reason, we don't crash into each other, do we? And when I lived for 10 years, my first 10 years in the spiritual community, I lived in a small monastery with 8 or 9 other women. And every morning we would meditate together for a period of time, and we became very close on many, many levels, as you can well imagine. We worked together, we lived close together, we meditated together. We were very good friends in every way. And I used to puzzle that we would all go into our little temple, which at that time was a canvas teepee. We'd go into our temple, we'd meditate deeply together, and then everybody would take the same personality home. You understand? We would feel so close to each other. I would wonder why I didn't just become someone else. I can't think about those things too long because they'll tip my mental balance. But you know, there's this, it's just we get so in tune. And it's not really that we're in tune with each other. It's that we're all in tune with the ray of grace that's animating us. And you can make a deep commitment as a disciple, you know, to a particular line of gurus, which many of you have done, and I have done. But what we really are disciples of is we are disciples of wisdom, one of the 8 manifestations of the divine. We are disciples of divine truth. And all of our practices and all of our willpower, which is enormous, and we have to use it. Coming here, I've lived in spiritual community since I was 24 years old, with 1 year when I moved from one community that I was a founding member of to starting the other one. There was a year in between when I just rented a little house in a neighborhood in Palo Alto where I was at that time. And I know this is odd, but I remember in this rented house looking out the window, and the landlord had sent someone to cut the grass. And so about 4 feet away from me out the window, there was a man close to the house I was living in cutting the grass. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his family. I didn't know if he had children. I didn't know what he was interested in. And it actually startled me. It's like, oh yeah, this is how most people live. And so seeing what is happening here, I realized just the experience of being with like-minded souls in a systematic way where we come together to attune ourselves. Because the reason we don't fall through the chair and then go all the way to whatever's on the other side of the world is because we're vibrating at different rates. And this is me giving you a science lesson, and you can see how much I know. But we're vibrating at different rates, and so we can't merge. When I'm singing with the woman who sings well next to me, our vibrations match, and I lose my voice in the voice of the choir. And I know if I can hear my voice, I'm not attuned. But it takes all of our energy to attune ourselves so that we can stand in the ray of grace. And that's why Yogananda writes that the search for eternal verities concomitant, he had such a vocabulary, meaning it has to go with it. You cannot find the eternal verities without also having the discipleship to be able to attract wisdom. And ultimately, if it's your karma and your destiny, to attract that line of teaching, which will really change you. This is where we finally get to. I do all my practices, I think about it, I try, but something else happens. I was saying earlier, Swami Kriyananda was giving a satsang, and this was in the very early years of our community. The Ananda Village, we call it now, is the original community, and it has about 200 something full-time residents now. In the time I'm talking about, we could all fit in the living room of Swami G's house. So it was maybe 30 or 40 people at the most. And he would give these satsangs, and we had no electricity, and there was no electricity, just little gas lights and kerosene lights, and just totally, his house was halfway down this hill, and we were just nowhere. Sometimes it would be snowing, and we'd just be in this dome. Really, I didn't know whether we were in the cave in India, whether we were in the catacombs with the Christians, whether we were on Mars. We were just alone with this magnificent consciousness, and he was trying to enlighten us, to bring us to some vague idea of what we were trying to do with our lives. And I remember on this occasion 2 things that he said simultaneously, at the same event. He said, at the end of all these incarnations of striving, when finally we release forever our delusion of separateness and know ourselves as we have always been, which is one with the infinite light, he said, you will see all your incarnations just stretching behind you. And you will realize that none of it really happened in the way that we think it happened. It's like, this is the image that is meaningful to me. If you're walking in the forest and you see a stick on the road, and you think it's a poisonous snake, and you become very excited and you run away and you get everyone to come and kill the poisonous snake, and all these things happen, but it's really just a stick. But all these things have happened because you thought the stick was a poisonous snake. And so that's how our incarnations look to us. We had real experiences that we really felt, but they were never what they seemed. They were really just this adventure to understand our own true nature so that we can align ourselves with this universal understanding and so that we can merge with that. So Swami G says when you look back at all those incarnations, you realize it was just a play of shadow and light. That the light was always shining, but from time to time we blocked it. But he said, the one thing that we will remember, even at the moment of enlightenment, this is, he had the right to speak, and I have the right to repeat what he said, okay? He said, in that moment of enlightenment, you will see, and like pearls on a string, every time you made a real connection with the infinite light, that will always be with you. Because that's the only thing that actually really eternally happened. Isn't that a beautiful thought? When you're sitting in this temple or any of the temples here and you're chanting the way I'll say we are chanting the way we're chanting, and you lose your own voice and you lose your own separateness, and the only thing that exists is that vibration, which is bringing the ray of grace into us. These moments we will remember and treasure them with our whole heart. But it isn't that the divine moves away from us, it's that we just move a little bit away from the divine. We create a shadow. Not a black shadow, just a little shadow. And then on that same occasion, Swami Ji just said this so like, let me give you a good piece of advice. He said, you're going to figure it out and get it right sooner or later. He said, why waste a few million years? Why waste a few million years chasing after shadows, chasing after that which will never fulfill us? Now, bear in mind, we all have our karma. And this advice has to be understood because it's the flight of the bumblebee for each of us. And we're crisscrossing over each other. And what we're having to do, what is forward for one person may in fact not be forward for someone else. We are constantly trying to raise our awareness, expand our awareness, and become bigger in the sense of our self-definition. What do I identify with? When I think of myself, who am I? What am I? Am I my culture? Am I my parents' child? Am I the language I speak, the country I came from? Or am I the infinite spirit? And how often can we remember that? And you see, that's where the personal, integrated willpower and power has to come from, because there's always another voice that's trying to tell us that's not true. But the power of the divine is a constant light, a constant lighthouse. And there's absolutely nothing you can do, no matter how horrible. There's nothing you can do to actually separate yourself from that light. We can cease remembering, but that doesn't affect the light. And so all we have to do is step back into it. It doesn't make any difference how many times we turn away. The light is just always waiting for us. Isn't that a beautiful thought? There you have it. Why do we ever worry about anything? If it's not the happy ending, it's not the ending. And so we just keep going until we have reached the goal. So my friends, God bless you.